From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
I could not be happier to have everyone here, and please join me in welcoming Fiona McCrae, Tom Sleigh, and Juan Felipe Herrera.
I'm going to clap for you two. We're going to start with a reading.
All right.
From each poet.
Fiona asked us to read about 5 minutes, so that's what I'll do. And I always like to start with a new poem, so that's what I'll do. That, you know, kind of keeps you honest. Here it is. Okay.
Nice and loud.
Anybody hear me? Okay. Nothing worse than sitting there and you can't hear a word. Anyway, before I start, I just want to say it's a real thrill to be here in this wonderful university club. It's probably the first time I've had a jacket and I mean, you know, I'm all very spiffed up. And I just want to say that it's a great delight to be here with my old pal Fiona McCrae. I want to thank Jim and the unbelievably dapper and suave Rob for making this thing happen. You know, I also, you know, organize events, and I know how difficult they are to put together. And I'm really delighted to be here. And I also want to say what a pleasure it is to be with Juan Felipe. And I'm just glad to be with all of you here and a lot of friends in the audience. And Matt, thank you. Josh Ostergaard, thank you. And that's it. There won't be any more thanks. It's all downhill from there. So I'm going to read a poem that's in 5 short parts. And this poem comes out of some journalism. I don't really know how to put it anymore. I've done a lot of journalism over the years, and from starting around 2007 in the Middle East and East Africa. And this piece just comes out of having been about 2 years ago, just before Libya fell apart, traveling around with a militia all over the country. And I know you say the word militia and everybody goes, ooh, militia, oh, you know, but everybody in this room would be in a militia. So it's a very, very common thing. And when you move for different parts of Libya, you move from one militia's command to another militia's command. And that's just how you circulate. And so when I was there, I met a young man, a militia leader who fought in the revolution that overthrew Gaddafi. And he had been seriously wounded. He had a big scar on his cheek, which deformed his face. And I was just thinking about what it would be like to be him, and I kept looking at his scar and thinking it was a certain kind of writing on his cheek, kind of calligraphy. So anyway, the poem is in 5 parts, like I said. 1. Once I cleared the choppers, whop, whop, whop. The airstrip opened up into a treeless drift of sand, where I heard a distant hammer tap against the wind and smelled scorched concrete wafting from shell holes in the runway. Then we were speeding along in the back of an open truck, its axle shuddering over hardpan as I rubber-necked at burned-out tanks, turrets blown to the roadside, seeming somehow sadder than the men who died. 2. Just a boy who played soccer until the revolution. He learned with a bad shoulder how to fire an AK-47, shoot off a mortar so he didn't burn his hands, talk away fear. The radio broadcasting endless hero-victim chatter sent him racing behind a wall, hiding from the sniper's crosshairs. Pinwheeling shrapnel sent him to the hospital, where he suffered as much from boredom as his wound. Playing with a lizard he holds by the tail, the panting ribs pulse as he dangles it head down, his bandaged cheek crisscrossed with tape, looking like it aches. The hot breeze dries sweat from his face as the lizard whip lashes loose, scrambling across the sheet to disappear under the bed. One wounded foot leaving pinpricks of blood. Not a trail or code, just the tail left dangling in the boy's fingers as he laughs and swinging it around, shows it to his mother frowning, "What's that?" and snatches it away. 3. Each time the boy, grown up now, is forced to flash ID, his scar tissue's calligraphy writes on his body the history of his own scalloped, twisted flesh, shrugging off my pose of objectivity. Shrinking, puckering, the skin grafts on his burns shine white as phosphorus in the sun. And whatever I write down, the counter text scrawled on his cheek revises itself each time his mouth flexes into a grin or frown. As year by year, whatever's written there gets that much harder to decipher, that much further from the war, until in the mirror he'll see and won't see his own scars. 4. In shade and sunlight, the lizard grows a new tale that writes in dust over a broken cobble its slithering trail until it stops short, heart pulsing in its throat, red eyes fixed on that foreign shape which takes out a notebook, scribbles, green and brown skin, broken black diamonds arranged in vertical stripes, claws that look like hands of a fever victim. And then scribbled notes in neutral tones about mortar fire, flak jackets, the strap on the helmet that always too loose or too tight, the boy's bombed house, shock waves blowing out the windows to let in riot gas, an adrenaline rush, the smell of tears, chemical as ammonia, and as harsh. 5. All around me, the sound of men sleeping, their bodies shifting slightly in their dreaming, the engines of the trucks still cooling, giving off little ticks and pings. And then I was climbing out of my blankets to slip under the tent's canopy, stumbling away from mumbling and snores, the desert cold making the dew-damp sand stiffen so it crunched underfoot as I crept beyond the watchman to take a piss. And at the edge of the camp, near the chickens in their coop, heads tucked under wings, was a fox staring back, or what I thought was a fox, ducking down into the shadows and disappearing behind the trucks, that in the morning would obliterate its precise four-clawed tracks, that the next night and the next would keep on coming back until the chickens got eaten or the fox was killed. Then pattering of my own piss brought me back into the cold. The sky overhead, dark and bright, bundled bodies in the dawn beginning to levitate. Whose elbows dreamed up the chokehold? Who pushes back the boundaries so that no man's land is the only Heimat, homeland, patrie? Who strips us of our shadows so that our histories turn to glass? And then it was time for breakfast, to sip tea, smoke, and take my place beside the others in the truck. And then I'll finish with this short poem for my, I don't know what to call her. You know, she came into my life via divorce. So I'm not really her biological dad, but I feel like her dad. So, so we have this little code. I'm her dear almost dad, and she's my dear almost daughter. So we're both each other's dad. So that works. Second sight. In my fantasy of fatherhood, in which I'm your real father, not just the almost dad arriving through random channels of divorce, you and I don't lie to one another, shrugging each other off when words get the best of us, but coming full circle with wan smiles. When you hole up inside yourself, headphones and computer screen taking you away, I want to feel in 10 years that if I'm still alive, you'll still look at me with that same wary expectancy, your surreptitious, cool-eyed appraisal, debating if my love for you is real. Am I destined to be those shark-faced waves that my death will one day make you enter? You and your mother make such a self-sufficient pair. In thrift stores, looking for your prom dress, what father could stand up to your unsparing eyes, gauging with such erotic calculation your figure in the mirror? Back of it all, when I indulge my second sight, all I see are dead zones. No grandchildren, no evenings at the beach, no bonfires in a future that allows one glass of wine per shot of insulin. Will we both agree that I love you always, no matter my love's flawed, aging partiality? My occupation now is to help you be alone. Thank you.
That was beautiful.
Thanks.
That was beautiful. Again, thanks everybody. I really appreciate being here at the University Club, and I really enjoyed our conversations. We had some conversations about possible projects already, and using radio. And so I just want to tell Rob that there's more projects coming, Rob. And things really began to happen for me when you came in and we met. So thank you, and also Tom and Fiona and the whole team. Thanks again. You know, I'm like you. You know, I have a fresh poem, and I've been deciding whether to read it or read this or read that. So it's kind of like the tradition, isn't it, to bring out a poem that we just wrote. And I don't know why we really do it, but we do it. It's kind of, I don't know, just that's what we do. Isn't that strange? It's a strange little thing. We got a ton of poems already published and the whole thing. And here we go with with a poem that we just typed this morning. So Victor Martinez was a really good friend of mine, a meticulous poet and writer, and he got the National Book Award for Parrot in the Oven in 1996, and he got it by just cracking each line into little pieces, and just really worked so hard on the language and the story and everything you could ever imagine. Every word in that book is measured and weighted and looked at from 1,000 angles, from 20 feet away, pinned on the wall, and then he would literally use it. He passed away in 2011 from lung cancer. A lot of my good friends have passed away from cancer recently, the last 10, 15 years. And I had written him some poems early on called The Undelivered Letters to Victor while he was alive. So I remember him saying, he was a really deep guy, really deep thinker, and on the back of his only a poetry collection called Caring for a House, he says quite a bit. He writes a big old giant paragraph on the back of that book, and he talks about this thing he calls super imagination. And who knows, if it's quantum theory or super imagination, and all about being in two places at the same time. So I always think of him. So this is called Thought Poem for Victor Martinez, undelivered, still thinking about super time, super space, and super imagination. You said what you wrote was being written by someone somewhere else at the same time. Some country, some town, in a broken bus or a polished grain desk or a cheap clinic deep in the rainforest, somehow a hut fixed with branches and strings, just maybe a school tilted en route to Tumbo by Palenque, somewhere. What would you be writing? It does not matter. And why? Poetry. Why that? Why continue its tiny mouth on a page? Why not a simple message? Just a message. There is more hunger than poetry, Vic. I am pushing down the 300 buildings. There is thirst, Vic. More thirst than knowledge. You always spoke of this thing, knowledge. You read Heidegger, What is Thinking? More than knowledge. Vic, how about knowledge in the hand, in the gut? Water from the stone. Hunger in the center of your flesh, not flesh, is not knowledge. It is pure insight, sinew. It is edge. More edge than poem paper poems are not bread. I am calling for bread. With empty offices at night, the ones across from my 10th floor poetry bed door, DC. Somewhere else in the variety realms, even though I am here, brother, and you are not. So that's the thought poem for Victor Martinez that I hammered out this morning. This is Task the Void, and this is Ayotzinapa, and this is it always comes to this too, doesn't it? Which poem to read? I Walk Back Nowhere. Let's do I Walk Back Nowhere. I walk back nowhere, under moonlight, The dogs look as if they are angels, the ones I never imagined, with drooling silvery rays and torn behinds. Yes, glowing in a strange and excited phosphor. Dancing, out of rhythm, racing up trees, chasing snails. This is like a children's book. Oh yes, the children, with rectangle heads and sack stomachs, with the eyes of Da Vinci, sad and impish, meticulous as Ibn Khaldun and taciturn as Nietzsche, phlegmatic and bitter. When they speak, they leave opalescent liquids on the grasses, stuttered under a half-erased mural of Arafat. Or is it Sharon? Wait, the children never speak. They nod their heads. They carry huge bundles strapped across their foreheads. They weep under newspapers and roll up their skirts and wash them in gutters, ponds, if they find them. Then they run to the sea. This is where we meet. On occasion, we make up stories. We remember fruits and produce as if blessed by the plutonium blasts. Remember the pears? They were so green. And the avocados, like guitars, honey, golden, and the asparagus like a lion's rainy mane, and our mouths water, their mouths water. I'm used to these stories. I'm used to the land, barren, bitten, and aflame with lies. I am used to our faces in this new, wild, dispassionate light. I learned this from my musician friends, from years waging feudal wars with poetry until I could not think of anything else. That's how. Thank you.
Thank you both. So now's the chit-chat time.
Chit-chat.
The heading for tonight was Voicing the World, How Poets Engage with Communities Within and Beyond Our Borders. So as I was sitting here, I did have a moment of enjoying the thought of the poetry, literary community that we're in here, and so many allies sitting there, and just grateful to you all, and to Jim and Rob for hosting us. Thank you both for reading.
Thank you.
Juan Felipe, in your, somewhere in that book, the one you just read from, is Literary Asylums, and in it you write, this is just an extract from it, you say, the idea of an audience, the idea itself tears into all experience, the assumption of an audience, they are listening. So I thought we might start with community as audience, and just ask each of you what assumptions you make about audience, where your poems are headed, if any.
Well, I was always concerned with the question of audience, because I also started out in theater, kind of street theater, and I always wanted to, and having read Antonin Artaud's book on the theater of cruelty, and his journey to Mexico and to Tarahumara ritual, and how he became all aflame with that, how he really got a lot of stuff out of that. He wanted this kind of visceral, ritual, intense, duendes of flame, ritual, explosive self happening, where words would just burble out, and he was like a super totally present in this ritual, compressed, symbolic, physical, visceral moment. So I was excited by that back in high school, and so I wanted to figure that out, where there is no audience, because there's no audience in that world, in a sense. So then I began to do community theater and political theater, and there was always an audience, and I was always trying to deal with that. And now I visit so many audiences, and they're all so amazing and they're real audiences, and they're different, and they ask different things of me, and I feel all their lives hitting me, and I go to them, and we kind of come together, and my poetry, they changed my poetry. I go, I'm going this way, but you're pulling me this way. You know, I want to write this, but you want me to write that. And I had this in mind, but you have this in mind. You know, I feel that from the audience. You know, I feel it. I go, I'm reading this, poem. I go, then I look out. They go, come on, let's move on to something, something real. Come on, Juan. So I feel that, I feel that, and or they're excited, and they, all these things, and I want to adjust, because I'm in the moment. I'm in the moment. So now for me, it's a moment. It's a momentarium. I'm in that momentarium, and I want to be in that momentarium. Of course I am. Of course we all are. But so now my poems are changing because of that. Yeah.
Well, audience. The first thing that immediately came to my mind. I also read Artaud.
Remember that?
Yeah. And
Is that great?
The Tarahumara, and,
yeah.
A lot of the poems too.
Yes.
And I was always interested in his idea about how the actor makes a gift of his whole being to
right.
an audience.
That's right.
And that was something that, when I first came across it, was such a different kind of way of thinking about.
It was.
Just approaching what it was you were doing, because before that time, what the fuck did I know? I mean, I grew up in a tiny town in Utah. There was no culture of any kind.
No.
And so to come across this, what I thought of as an audience was me at the school play.
That's right.
And then I did some theater work as well. And one of the things I thought was interesting about doing a theater was that until I read Artaud, I always thought it was like a kind of presentation. Yeah,
presentation, and they're out there and we're over here.
As opposed to a gift of yourself to
a gift of yourself.
What was going on in their minds. And so that's just an interesting way to kind of segue with what you're talking about.
And no boundary, breaking that boundary.
No boundary,
breaking
exactly.
the boundary.
Yeah, exactly. And breaking down the whole idea that when you're playing a role, when you're playing a part, that the audience is in some way completely has suspended disbelief, and they really think you're Julius Caesar. Whereas really, as far as Artaud is concerned, he was Artaud and he was Julius Caesar.
He was Artaud and Julius Caesar.
So I always thought that was an really interesting idea. And just in terms of writing poems, that's the kind of public aspect of it. And I think Juan spoke really beautifully to that. Yeah. But just in terms of the private aspect, when I'm sitting down, I think of my audience as being all these dead people, like Phil now.
That's true.
Yes.
Yes.
Like dead friends. I think of those people as, sort of being in the same room with me, and I don't want their voices to be too loud.
That's right.
But I like having them there, and so consequently, I think that for me, an audience is it's this present moment here, like Juan Felipe was talking about, but it's also when you're privately by yourself. It's like the whole community of the dead.
That's right.
That is speaking to you and through you, and that you're trying to speak back to them. Yeah. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things about being involved in an art form like poetry. The money is great. We all love the money.
Big money. There's big money. There's a Bentley and a Rolls Royce outside.
Yeah, a Bentley and a Rolls Royce, right. But the thing that's really wonderful is that you actually have a sense of, going, it's like every poem you write is this time machine. And it goes both forward and it goes backward. And I love the sense of connection that gives me to, a wider world, because I'm not a conventionally religious person at all. And it sort of makes, and I always think that the idea of posterity is kind of, distant from me, and it also feels kind of pretentious. And you know, I'm writing my poems for posterity. Just like, who the fuck is posterity? You know? So it's sort of like, but if I have the idea that in fact, you know, I'm in this time machine and it's going forward, then again, it's like that present moment that Artaud was about. It's a present moment in the future, and it's also as much present in the past.
Right. I think that's where we're headed, because as we're talking about this, it all comes down to mind. It's one big, juicy, spiraling mind that goes back, forward, sideways, in unknown directions, and it just keeps on. Yeah. I think that's where we're riding. Yeah. So the audience was maybe just a draft. A draft concept.
Yeah. It's like the Teilhard de Chardin had this concept of the noosphere, in which there was the entire Earth was blanketed by an atmosphere of thought, of thinking, of spiritual endeavor, and it's a kind of a beautiful idea.
Or the universe blanket. The universe blanket that the Mayans have.
I don't know that.
It's a universe blanket. And it's also what the women's huipil, you know, we see those nice Indian shawls, and they're like universe blankets. They have the story of the universe on them, and by wearing them and moving, you wear it, you know, and you move. Of course, you're walking and you're moving around. You're also contributing to the motion of the universe. So it's like a universe blanket, and the whole notion of a Chanquin Viejo, one of the elder Mayan, Candon Mayas in Chiapas, and the vestiges of the rainforest.
You knew him? I know
yes.
him too.
Yes.
I met him when I was doing anthropology.
When was this?
It was back in, you know, just in San Cristobal de las Casas with Pepe Martinez, the bush pilot, and Robert Bruce.
Robert Bruce, he was there in the 50s.
Yeah, and then I met him when he was a pretty old guy. He had
in the
cancer.
70s? Oh, later.
Yeah. Well, it was just when the Guatemalan War was going to, because I was working for Gertrude Blom.
Oh, you were? I was there with Gertrude Blom.
Yeah,
I was there. I know Gertrude. I knew him, and I knew all his sons.
I mean, I met his son, Chanquin Viejo, and then I met, did you know
Cayum
Yukmash?
Yeah.
Oh, my God. You knew Cayum?
Yeah.
What a sweet guy he was.
What a sweet guy. That was a sweet guy. That's right.
Yeah, I'm sorry we're having a conversation.
So we came back to Chanquin Viejo. Remember he said that when the youth cut a timber of caoba,
yes,
a star falls. Because you're ripping up the rainforest, and every time you rip down and cut down and kill or sever a tree, you're also severing a star.
I mean, the context of this is that Juan Felipe and I were both in Chiapas in southern Mexico, maybe at more or less the same time.
When were you there?
I was there, when I was like probably 35, 40 years ago almost, something like that.
Yeah.
Just when the Guatemalan War was getting heated up.
Time.
And Chanquin Viejo is a Lacandon, and Gertrude Blom was kind of
what a world.
You know, she was an archaeologist. She was what she really was a great photographer. That's what she really was. And and a strong force of nature for sure. Did you ever? Oh my God! The stories no one could tell about Gertrude Blom. Yeah. Oh my God! I remember once a woman. She had a kind of research center.
She did, yeah.
And anthropologists would come from all over the world to visit there, and the way she kind of financed the research center was she also sort of had a quasi kind of hotel.
It was a quasi hotel.
Yeah, and people would come in, and it was a little bit like Fawlty Towers, right?
Yeah, a little.
Yeah, so the guests would come in, but they had really wonderful. Yeah. They had great anthropologists from all over the world, actually.
And so you got into anthropology?
I did. Yeah, no, I studied it, and that's why I was down there. Yeah.
Oh, so did I. Yeah, I got a degree in anthropology.
Yeah, I mean, I studied it. I did all the, all the British guys. Anyway, but see, I've been so interested in that stuff for forever.
Me too.
Yeah.
So, so Gertrude Blom and Franz Blom.
Franz Blom, her husband,
archaeologist. So what was the last year you were there?
Last time I was down there was long after Trudy's death. And
Oh, past the 90s,
transformed
around
it.
the late 90s?
Yeah, and they transformed it in, you know,
Oh, they
that
did?
now it was taken over by the government, and it hadn't have, all the aura was gone.
Can I, a minute, can I bring you back?
Sorry.
No, it's great.
Yeah,
it's
good
funny
to
when,
remember, huh?
when just sort of like looking at you both and not looking at you both now, but looking at you both together and you think, oh, that's two different poets, and then you do start to see similarities in thinking about this idea about communities within and beyond. You've both written about places not right here, and you have public subjects in a certain way, and you've had all your travels in the Middle East and East Africa, and sometimes you've written about that in prose and sometimes in poetry, and then you have the book about well, a lot of your work, but then the Senegal taxi that I thought was kind of interesting, where that there's prose and poetry within that. So I was wondering about how poetry serves as a voice to communicate about the other, the person who's not you, how you do that, and what responsibilities come with that to whoever you might be writing about. And there's just, once you start going public, then words like duty and so on start coming in, which is a different when you're writing about your inner, you and your stepdaughter. No one can contradict you about that. If you're writing about something that's a little bit, when your subject is beyond, what does that bring up for you, and how do you've both written theatre, you've both written prose, how do you find the form?
Well, you know, that I remember that's a big issue still, but it used to be such a hot issue back in the early 80s. I remember we used to have these big old hot debates. I think poets in the schools had these big hot debates about, well, you can't write as a Chicano voice because you're not Chicano, and you can't write, African American voice, how dare you, and all that. And we kind of liked that concept, we were kind of grooving with that concept. And was it cultural appropriation and all that was like hot, wrestling. Those wrestling writers were wrestling on the floors, trying to work that out. And but then it's not a, that's kind of all said and done now in a way, because everything is crisscrossing and everything is changing. A poem is a poem. This is not a mirror. It's not a police report. It's not a social science tract, even though it could be all those things, in a way. But it's it's made out of jelly. It's just perception. And what we see is changing. What we write is changing. Our thoughts are changing. Today is different than yesterday. So there's really no real solid appropriation. And that's one thing for me. And then the other thing is, you really have to, this is going to sound a little corny, but you really have to feel it. You really have to, you may be way off, but you really have to feel it. And you really, for me, when I wrote Senegal Taxi, I looked at National Geographic in the dentist office. It was a very highfalutin intellectual moment. I was in the dentist office, and there was a National Geographic magazine, and it was a feature on Africa, and you know how cool those features are. And it was about the Sahel, the sub-Saharan belt, the Sahara, and right underneath the Sahara, there is this kind of weather belt called the Sahel. And here's Sudan, way over here, and way over here is Senegal. And because of the atrocities committed in Darfur, in the Sudan, people were running. They were massacred, but some of them escaped and were trying to go through these big old climatic upheavals of dust and winds and heat, and then people grabbing whoever was migrating or escaping and just killing them. And these little tight, locked what they call ghost houses with Kalashnikovs, so you couldn't escape. You grabbed you, throw you in there, and just torture you. And then they had to make it all the way to Senegal, at the very edge of the coast, all the way from Sudan to Senegal. And then from Senegal, they had to find a little canoe or boat and try to make it to the Canary Islands. And then from there, they had to do the same thing and make it to Spain. And from there, they had to do the same thing and make it to New York. What a zigzagged, long, impossible journey, a migrant journey, a escape, life or death journey. And I said, that sure is much different than making it from Mexico City or any town, even though the torture is there through the border and then the scorching South Arizona deserts where many migrants die or are killed and then taken into freezers in Tucson. So I was just amazed by that. I was moved by that, and I said, I don't know. This is moving me. I don't know what's going to happen. Then I happened to get a month at the Montalvo Art Center in Saratoga. We have a month to write and cook with people and feed yourselves. It's really cool. And so I had 30 days, and I just wrote that. I just wrote that piece, no matter how it came out. Senegal Taxi. And I did all the things I wasn't supposed to do back in the 80s. I did all the things I wasn't supposed to.
You did lots of different voices throughout that book, right?
And I use a lot of different voices.
Including
I use a lot of different voices.
Kalashnikov.
The Kalashnikov voice, the voice of the ant, the fly, and on and on. But I contradicted myself, which felt good. Yeah.
Couldn't be
It's
pinned
still
down.
problematic. But then I was surprised, and it may not be 100% true, but I was kind of cautiously, poetically, weirdly happy that a man from Senegal in New York said I was in the vicinity of weird accuracy. The only accuracy a poem can have.
Yeah, weird accuracy.
It's weird
I
accuracy.
agree. Yeah. Well, it's funny. I'll just say that Robert Frost once said that just in response to this, because the idea of cultural appropriation.
It's true.
Yeah, because I did poets in the schools too, and there was a lot of that kind of talk around at the same time, and it was always complicated because what you really wanted to say was. Robert Frost did a really smart thing once. He said the thing that he really wanted was the freedom of his material. And that seemed to me like if you were a poet, that's the thing that is most important.
That's your thing. That's our thing.
And so if you break other person's rules, that's fine. But. From myself, in writing about what I feel like I owe the people that I write about, like that Libyan guy, for example. I was very aware that his experience was, in many ways it was radically different than mine, but in many ways it was weirdly similar because, the story that he told me about Gaddafi. And what it was like growing up under Gaddafi was strangely similar because he said what would happen was, when he was a kid, they didn't have any television stations. So, matter of fact, I had one, really, and that was the one. But they didn't have much entertainment. So he was watching, so when he was a little boy, I remembered watching an animated series about a baby bee that gets separated from its mother and wants to find its mother. And just as they get to the climactic episode, Colonel Gaddafi comes on and begins to blather on about Pan-Africanism. So he said there was that element of it, and then he said later on there was another program about a little boy who wanted to become a soccer star, and he looked like just about the moment he was going to make the team. And again, last episode, which you never got to see, there Colonel Gaddafi is talking about the Green Book. So. I'm really aware at the same time and thinking, when I was a kid, I watched stupid television shows like that and really got deeply invested in them. And I thought, well, there's a kind of intersection there between his childhood and my childhood, even at the same time as, I've been in war zones, but I never fought in a war. Not even close, you know what I mean? And so the thing that I wanted to do was, in a way, when I was writing something about him, is I wanted the first thing to acknowledge is, well, this is where we have in common, but these are the areas for me that I just have to acknowledge the limits of what I know.
Yeah.
And I think if there's a way of building that into the poem, then this whole issue about, is this your material, is that my material, it seems silly to me at the end of the day.
It's a little silly.
And the fact of the matter is, if you feel compelled to take on this material, well, then you'll let other people sort it out. And they will. I mean, they will.
Yeah.
One of the things I find really strange right now is a kind of this phenomenon of internet shaming, which I just find very, 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 it's troubling and disturbing. And one of the things about doing the kind of, writing about subjects that are sort of located in cultures that are very different than your own is just being able to acknowledge the limits of what you can know.
In one of your recent poems, there's a line, the first line is, you've got to put your pants on in the house of fact.
Right,
So
you got to put your pants on right, and you got to put your pants on in the house of fact.
So
it's a very
as long
important
as you
thing
kind
to
of-
do, yeah.
There's something that's going back to,
But you have to find a house of fact, otherwise your pants will fall down.
Exactly. Yeah. And the house of fact is being ruined at every minute. So.
yeah.
But you're right. It's about connecting where we can connect. You're right. It's about compassion and suffering, and that's where I wanted to go. And I didn't mess with cultural practices. I didn't mess with one-dimensionality. I wanted to make the people we thought were terrible, like the Janjaweed, the actual paramilitary. Right. So I got to bring that character into this piece. That's going to be impossible because I don't have any idea about that person, and there's nothing really written about Janjaweed. So how am I going to do this? How am I going to do this? Because if I leave that character out, I'm going to leave a big piece out because this is the killer. So I got to bring that. I'm going to have to challenge myself and jump into that hot griddle. And I throw myself into the boiling chile sauce, and so I brought that character in a radio show. I threw a radio show in the middle of the book, hosted by Bart Crimson, and then Bart Crimson is the host, the anchor dude, who's very nasty, and he really pushes this guy, which I like doing that. I like to have that pushy anchor, Come on, what do you mean you don't know about those bombs? Will you get with the story? You know what you've done. Come on, get to the story. Only got 30 seconds. So I made that radio host like that. Then I made the Janjaweed more like, well, I did have a dream. And there were bodies. And the chest was open, The chest was open. Oh, so all of a sudden you got feelings, huh? So so I kind of turned things around as best as I could, and I enjoyed doing that, and that gave me a little room to bring in those characters. But then again, we don't know I didn't know where I was going, and
Sure, yeah.
we don't know where we're going.
Yeah, I mean, I once wrote a poem that used, I want to do a poem in the voice of Charles Taylor, a war criminal.
Yeah, like that.
Yeah, and so there's a way in which you can. I think it's really how you pitch it. In fact,
how you pitch it,
because Charles Taylor in this poem is a sort of it's kind of a composite of my past, as well as being the historical Charles Taylor, and
that's right.
It's an interesting problem because basically what you're trying to do is, as far as I'm concerned, you're trying to make a credible voice that will fit inside a poem. And I think that's the important thing, a credible voice that will fit inside a poem. It doesn't have to be,
the voice.
Yeah, the voice, but a credible voice.
And then we don't even know, we don't think about that.
Right.
We're not thinking, we got the feeling for it, right?
No, it's the idiom. When you get the words and you get the idiom right, then you don't worry about it so much. Yeah.
Yeah.
It seems like from every now and again, when you're saying it's this, so throughout this conversation. We've put this conversation, we've gone the mind, the material, and connecting. I feel it's kind of a nice, the mind where you invent it.
And the house of fact.
And the house of fact.
Putting your trousers on in the house of fact.
I think we're ready to have Jim come back. But thank you both very much. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Jim.
Well, it's indeed an honor to be in the presence of two such great poets.
Such great anthropologists.
And my publisher.
How about that?
It's my job to give the benediction. And it'll be brief, blissfully. But I want to urge those of you in the room to embrace the Poetry and Literature Center at the Library of Congress, a great group run by a great man, and and the National Council of the Graywolf Press, which is open to everyone. You know, the word that I'd like to hit on tonight with regard to Graywolf is non-profit. And non-profit means that we rely very heavily to sustain the excellent work that Fiona and her staff do on contributors and a community of readers and literature fans around the country. And we hope you embrace the council as well. And we'd love to have you learn more about it. Before you leave tonight, I think you can still get a glass of wine. But we also have some books from Tom and Juan Felipe, who I think they'll be able to inscribe them for us, and some catalogs, book lists for your perusal and to take with you. And you have my thanks for coming to the University Club.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.